My name's Adam Myers. Once again, I find myself standing between conference attendees and happy hour, so I will try to make this as entertaining and brief as possible. So, not to disappoint, well, I guess to disappoint, I don't have anything about big data in my presentation. What I focus on every day is the challenge of the human problem. Who's behind the attack and what are they after? When we first started CrowdStrike a few years ago, a lot of the companies we were working with believed that they had a malware problem. They were looking at Zeus and Dire and a number of other malware problems, and they were seeing some intrusion activity, and they thought that if they could just get their hands around this malware problem, then they'd be able to solve their security problems. But the reality is that they don't have a malware problem. What they have is an adversary problem. Computers don't attack computers, people do. Behind every attack is a human, somebody that's set up infrastructure, that's provisioned VPSs, that's developed malware, that's come up with an exploit, that's packaged that exploit up, that's gone through a whole bunch of different steps in order to successfully pull off an attack. And what I'm going to talk about is really how do we get our hands around that human problem and what can we do about it. So we split up adversaries. We track adversaries all over the world. Last time I counted, we were over 70 different adversaries. And a lot of those adversaries that we track do emanate out of China. We really go to look for the adversaries that are going to have the most sustained impact to a business that's going to negatively impact one of our customers, and to be able to give them the understanding of who's attacking them, what are they after, and what could we do in the future to stop them from being successful? Because as the last presenter said, if you patch something that was relevant in the last attack, it's probably not that likely that it's going to be relevant in the next attack. So a number of different adversaries that we track out of China. Now, it's not just a China problem. There's a number of other nation states that are getting interested in this. Cyber has become something that's very attractive for a nation state from an economic and industrial espionage standpoint, and so others are starting to get into it. So we're tracking threats out of Iran. We track those under Kitten, Russia under Bear, North Korea. We had a lively discussion earlier today about a North Korea attack against Sony. We track that as Kalima. Anybody know what a Kalima is? Nobody? It's kind of dark out there. It's a magical flying horse. So usually we like to name the nation-state adversaries with reference to an animal that's relevant to that nation. And when we looked at North Korea, we had tracked this malware back to 2006. This is about 3 years ago we started tracking North Korea. And we looked for an animal that was representative of North Korea, so we went to the ultimate oracle of information, Wikipedia, and found that their national animal is actually a Kalima, which is a mythical flying horse, which was just the kind of crazy we were hoping we would find from North Korea. India we track under Tiger, a number of different countries and animals that are out there. As I said in the panel earlier, it's not just a targeted intrusion nation-state problem. We also track opportunistic criminal actors under Spider, and hacktivist, activist, nationalist, terrorist organizations under Jackal. Why do we track these adversaries? Why do we care? With any attack, you need to understand who's operating, what their intentions are. Are you the actual target, or is it opportunistic? And understanding these things allow you to have an effective conversation at a business level in order to protect the interests of the business. And that helps you because at the end of the day, we need to articulate what it is that we all do back in the nerdery trying to secure systems. So anybody ever hear this before, that defenders have to be right 100% of the time? Nobody? Anybody just want to go to happy hour? Yeah, there we go. So that's pretty scary. Nobody should be sitting here in this conference center. You should all be back at your desk drinking coffee and totally tweaked out that somebody's going to hack in. And attackers only need to be lucky once, which is really just an asymmetric problem to deal with. But there's a flip side to that nobody really talks about. These attackers aren't just doing it one time, right? They're involved in a long campaign, whether it be criminal, hacktivist, or nation state. They're continuously developing their tools, developing their tradecraft, figuring out new ways to get in. But over the course of a long campaign, it's really hard to stay anonymous. Operational security is really hard. We were able to track a Chinese POA unit, the 12th Bureau of the 3rd General Staff Department, track them back to an individual through a domain registration that he had made that had the address of the 12th Bureau headquarters in the domain registration, which surely an operational security mistake. And the other part is that humans are lazy. Can't really see out there. Show of hands, who reuses passwords? Who uses passwords for multiple accounts? Okay, anybody not raising your hand is a liar. We all do it. It's, even if it's just a couple of e-commerce sites, everybody, has their one password that they throw in. Maybe it's password. And attackers do this too, but they do it in terms of mutexes or mutual exclusions that are used to prevent the malware from running multiple copies of itself, or they'll put it into their domain registration, or they'll put it into their cryptography. And by finding these little gaps, these little lapses in what they're doing, and by the way, sometimes attackers can't help themselves. If you look at something like Stuxnet, where they put in deadfoot and they put in different dates, or the North Korean attackers, we see them routinely use dates relevant to the North Korean-South Korean conflict. That if you start to look at those things, you're able to start to pull these things together and relate different attacks to each other. And it really makes it an interesting story to tell. And so with that, let me tell you a quick story. The Paracel Islands, much closer to here than they are to the United States, are claimed by a number of different countries. So Vietnam, Taiwan, China, all claim the Paracel Islands. And they're essentially useless pieces of rock. You might have seen very recently the attention being shown to the Spratly Islands and other similar kind of useless rock formation in the middle of the ocean. But the thing that's really interesting about them is that there's potentially oil underneath them. And so these islands, the Paracel Islands, were originally occupied by the French, who gave it over to China, via Japan after World War II. And in 1974, as the Vietnam conflict started to really become on the forefront of the media attention, China gifted the islands to Vietnam. North Vietnam is a show of solidarity with their socialist brothers. At the end of the war, they asked for them back, and Vietnam said, nah, we'll keep them. And so I didn't go through all of this to give you a long dissertation on the Paracel Islands, but you might have seen this in the news last May. In 2 May 2014, this HDHS 981 oil platform was moved into the Paracel Islands to start looking for energy resources. This is problematic because China, who owns the HS 981, was essentially encroaching in Vietnamese territorial space as far as the Vietnamese were concerned. And so they sent their best fishing boats to go deal with that problem. And a couple of fishing boats sank. Some people had their feelings hurt. Things went in a continuing escalating kind of path up through July. And in July, the Chinese removed the oil platform because it was monsoon season, or maybe because they were just tired of pissing off the Vietnamese. And that was an interesting kind of story last May through July. Now, if you look at what we saw in terms of intrusion activity last May, you see that there's a pretty big chunk of Chinese intrusion activity targeting Vietnam, and this comes from continuous monitoring of various sources of intelligence that we aggregate. And so if you look at June, it starts to really show a different story, right? So the Chinese had moved this energy exploration platform into territorial waters of Vietnam, and that might have been interesting from a sea or nautical kind of point of view, but underneath that, there was these cyber attacks occurring. And these cyber attacks were meant to provide the Chinese government, the decision makers, with the right information that they would need in case they had to make a decision. Intelligence is really about decision advantage, having the information in order to have the decision and make the right decision faster. So they want to get as much information as they can about anything related to boats moving through the area, about companies operating in Vietnam or in the area, policy decisions of foreign governments, etc. And so in May of last year, we were actually watching through our endpoint solution, we were watching a customer's network, and we saw an intrusion occur And this was towards the end of May, and we were working with the customer to clean it up. And in June, all of a sudden, something happened. So these two customers were actually think tanks. And these think tanks had policy experts on a variety of different regional areas. And so they were targeting the Southeast Asian policy experts in late May. In early June, all of a sudden, they start targeting Middle East policy experts. They dropped what they were doing and started looking at files on Middle East expert machines. And so we were a little bit puzzled by that. And we went and we looked, and the very day that they started looking at those Middle East policy experts was the very day that the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, had actually attacked a refinery in Iraq. So they had been able to get into the Basij refinery and take it over, which is certainly interesting, but we couldn't figure out necessarily why that related to China. And then we looked at where China gets their energy from, and you can see that they're starting to increasingly get a lot of oil from Iraq. And that's interesting because the Chinese now want to know, there's been an attack, this new group has taken over the oil refinery in Iraq. What's the US going to do? What are the coalition forces going to do? Are we going to go into Iraq? Are we going to disrupt the flow of oil? Are we going to do something regionally that they're going to need to prepare for in order to maintain and secure strategic energy reserves for the nation? So all of these attacks that we track, all of the things that we see, they have these stories that go with them. And I can go on and on and on about different stories. In the case of China and energy, all of this ties back to the 12th five-year plan has an addendum to it, which is essentially the 383 plan, or the Trinity plan, which talks about how they're going to domesticate the energy market in China. And so any of these attacks that we start to see has some sort of real-world story to it, which is what we focus on, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But first, let's talk about APT, and this is the last time I will use that back to the shit our industry says. I hate the term APT. And one of the reasons why I hate the term APT is that it's not really that advanced. In fact, I've been able to brief quite a few people on targeted intrusion tied to China. And when I sat them down and I walked them through everything, they said, that's it? And I can't tell you how many times that's happened. And, they're only as advanced as they need to be. If you're running Windows XP with Service Pack 2, are they going to burn some zero-day exploit in order to get access to that system? No, they're going to use something very unsophisticated because they don't need to be that advanced. It's sometimes even better, the old saying, keep it simple, stupid. Is it better to use a really advanced implant that has some advanced, command and control mechanism that Checkpoint or any of the other products might be able to identify? Or is it better to come in looking like a VPN user through a compromised account and have full network access through the VPN and look like any of the thousands of other users that you might be servicing? The other thing, too, is keep in mind that this is a day job held by, in many cases, .gov, .mil type people. So in terms of advanced, there might be somebody that's really high up on the elite scale, but there's plenty of people in green suits and otherwise that don't necessarily have the skills that you might hope for in an advanced attacker. So you've got linguists, you've got operators, developers, all of these different personnel. This isn't one person in these operations. There's many people behind it. And they're only as advanced as their weakest link. So if somebody does something really benign and stupid, then they're going to compromise that entire operation. The other thing is that they don't always use malware. There's another interesting use case. Anybody ever heard of China Chopper? Nobody? Okay, so this is something we've seen a lot of the attackers moving towards recently. It's a 79-byte backdoor. So much, it's so short that I'm still working on trying to get one of our sales engineers drunk enough to tattoo it on his arm. But it's that small that he could, not his arm. But what they're doing is they're finding a vulnerable web application. This is something that doesn't even need to be enterprise critical. It could just be some provisioning application or some really old help desk thing or whatever it might be, they find some sort of vulnerability that they can use to write arbitrarily to disk. They write the 79 bytes to disk, and they've got full access to the enterprise. And from there, we're seeing them use things like PowerShell. The Chinese intrusion operators are some of the best network administrators I've ever seen. They can use PowerShell for things that I didn't even know you could use it for. For example, what we've seen them do is come in using China Chopper, write the 79 bytes to disk, and then use PowerShell to change the sticky key application on a remote desktop that's publicly accessible. Anybody know what sticky keys is? You ever hit shift too many times when trying to log into your computer and it pops up that stupid menu? What they do is they actually modify the registry key so when you hit shift too many times, it pops up a command shell, meaning that they have essentially authenticated access to this system without having to do anything. From there, they can actually create a memory-backed file and put them out, they could write malware into that memory-backed file so that if the machine gets powered off during the incident response process, there's no evidence to look at. So there's some pretty cool things that they can do, and they don't always use malware, which not a lot of people know. And one of the things that we look for is what we call an indicator of attack. Many of you have probably heard the term indicator of compromise. This is the domains, the IPs, the URLs, the passwords, the mutexes, dozens of different things you might track to relate to an advanced attacker. But looking for an indicator of attack, that's something like looking for the privilege escalation or looking for a password dump activity occurring. So there's a lot of things that you can instrument with some of the advanced next generation endpoint solutions that are coming out. You can actually instrument these things and detect adversary activity based off of some of these behaviors. And the last one is that, and this is really the most important, pulling the plug doesn't necessarily help. Now, many of you might think, okay, we've found this advanced attacker, they're using this malware or whatever it is, and we've got their domain and their IP. Let's block it at the firewall. What do you think is going to happen next? They activate the secondary channel that they stood up. So they know that you're doing IR. We've seen a number of adversaries actually troll the IR team during the IR. So they know that they're doing an IR, and they like to mess with them. We've seen them, do things like register domains for command and control to mess with the IR team, and use the tools that they'll hide malware and file names that are the same as the tools that the IR team is using and things like that. So they know that you're doing IR. Pulling the plug on something is going to essentially tip your hat that you know what's going on. So it's better to have what we consider a coordinated remediation event. So if you've got a compromise, don't go with that knee-jerk reaction to cut it off. Wait until you understand everything that they're doing, all of the capabilities that they have, all the tools that they have, and then you can come up with a coordinated remediation event. Figure out all of the domains that you need to block, all of the IPs you need to block, all of the machines you want to pull the plug on and reformat. And once you have that good picture, then you're able to actually effectively kick them off the network or evict them from the network. If you just cut off one domain or one IP at a time, then you get into that whack-a-mole game, which a lot of organizations end up in, and it's not fun. It might be fun at first, it's not fun after a while. So what I always like to preach is what I call an intelligence-driven security approach. So understand the adversaries that are targeting your network. Figure out from your previous events, look at the malware that you found over the last 6 months, look at the indicators that you've identified over the last 6 months, pull these things together and start to understand, come up with your own naming system or whatever you want to do, but figure out who the different attackers are, and opportunistic malware aside, look at the actual intrusions that matter. What are the things that are going to have the most impact, material impact to your business? And that's what you need to focus on. Build appropriate defenses. On the flip side of that, I've heard a lot of risk management discussions. Find the systems you actually want to protect. As the gentleman previously said, he treats all users as hostile. I fully agree with that. Treat all users as hostile, but keep in mind there's still things that you need to make available to them and to customers, etc. So figure out how do you appropriately defend those resources while still making parts of it accessible to these hostile users. And by taking this intelligence-driven approach, if you understand who's attacking you and what you need to protect, then you can start to proactively build penetration testing scenarios or build proactive assessments to understand if this attacker came in today, how effective would they be at stealing the thing that I care the most about? If you're able to do that, then you're ahead of the game. So with that, you can then start to using appropriate intelligence, you can actually see what business verticals are being targeted by different threat actors. So in this case, I pulled healthcare as an example. So from our intelligence repository, we had these different nation states and criminal actors targeting the healthcare sector. And then you can look at, in this case, financial, certainly a much more interesting targeting set in the case of financial. Everybody, who doesn't want to target financial? And then you can look at by geolocation. So you could see, okay, let's overlay now the geolocation and the business vertical that I'm in, and let's see if there's anybody that I really need to be thinking about from an intelligence perspective, and build the appropriate defenses and really start to instrument yourself to protect against those threat actors. Oh, can't leave those two out. All right, so wrapping it up to try and get us back on time for an early happy hour here. A couple of final thoughts. So the discussion, and this is one of the biggest things that I advocate, is that we need to move the discussion from the SOC into the boardroom. We need to be able to have an effective discussion with the business owners and integrate what we're doing with the business owners. Because as I said before, in the example with the Paracel Islands, this is a nation state that was interested in a geolocation and something that certainly didn't look like it might have a cyber angle to it, but if you look under the surface, there is that cyber angle. What that tells us is that all of the things that we're worried about in the world today, cyber has a component with that now. So we need to think about that in terms of mergers and acquisitions, in terms of business deals that we're doing, in terms of potential negotiations that we get into. So we need to be able to take that threat and that attacking that we're seeing on the enterprise and bring that to the attention of the business managers, to the board, and let them understand that they need to incorporate all of this in their risk decisions in terms of physical security and financial security and all of the things that they have to factor in, that they need to start factoring what's going on in the enterprise to those decisions. Visibility and monitoring of attacks is essential. You need to have the right visibility in the right places. You need to be able to see what's going on across the network, what's going on the endpoint, and what's going on in the user world. And lastly, that intelligence-driven approach to security is what I believe is really the way to start to bring all of those things together and empower you to have those decisions at the business manager level and really tie this back into what the business is doing. So with that, I'll leave it open for Q&A for a minute. I think it looks like I have 3 minutes and 45 seconds that I might have gotten us back towards happy hour. And here's my contact information if anybody wants to reach out to me. Grab this because I forgot to bring business cards in my haste to get on the plane yesterday. So any questions, or just get the hook out and I'll be off the stage. All right. Well, thank you very much.